I thought it might be fun and painful for us to go through some of our past videos, some clips from our past videos. Let me know if you think this is far fetched. I'm wondering if the Michael Saylor trade is pushing Bitcoin up. That is then pushing up the entire complex up on leverage because it's not being supported by liquidity flows, like global dollar liquidity flows. Um, and we're essentially moving, just marching up and to the right, where nothing else is really. Tesla's pulling back, MicroStrategy's pulling back, SPY, Nasdaq, gold hasn't made a new high at all, but Bitcoin is just rose like crazy. Could it be in a Michael Saylor trade?
I guess that's kind of hard to say, and I wouldn't say that Bitcoin is much different than the S&P 500 or Nasdaq at the moment. It's also posted a lower high and currently retesting that lower high as well. So the question I have is whether we see a continued pullback for Bitcoin from here.
Well, what about if you consider because the rise that we had,
Hmm.
um, so in October, so this rise in Bitcoin happened, this breakout happened on October 11th, right? And then Bitcoin moved up 74% from there. But around that same time in for SPY, we already moved up 5% and a little bit more for the Nasdaq. October, fine, a little bit more for Nasdaq, 9%.
Hmm.
To me, that's nothing comparable to this massive move up that we received.
Oh, sure,
This to
sure.
me is
Okay.
like
Yeah,
super
yeah. In
suspicious.
percentage terms, for sure. I mean, there's no question Bitcoin took the cake last year.
And then the rise up, and this is the other thing that I want to take away that you taught me, and you pointed me to, and I'm just so happy for it. If I take a look at here, let me just remove you, and I just put on the VWAP waves. So these are the daily, weekly, monthly, 3 month VWAPs. The the price up, how we moved up since October, has essentially been at let it load. It's been marching right along these daily VWAP levels. It's just been so consistently moving up. And there was something that Michael Saylor had said in a video that we reviewed on, I don't know, yeah, it was on After Hours one of these past weeks, and he said something that was someone asked him, a newscaster asked him, "How are you not moving the market with your buys? You're buying billions of dollars of Bitcoin. You own the MicroStrategy owns 1% and growing of the Bitcoin reserve. How are you not moving the price?" And he says, I'm paraphrasing, "We're not moving the price because we're buying um, at certain levels to hide our purchases." Well, the only way that can happen is at VWAP levels.
I mean, that's a traditional way for larger position holders to get in for sure. I don't remember him saying that part. I'd have to go back to and actually confirm that. But typically, I think larger positions are executed in that way, where you're looking to sweep the books to get into much larger positions, or you're relying on VWAP because VWAP tends to be an area where there's a lot more volume that should show up, and you keep touching those levels over and over again. But I assume they're doing daily purchases in very small quantities and just getting in over time.
For billions of dollars worth, I would imagine it has to at least move. I mean, they have to be bouncing off of view. It's happening at the times where he says they're buying,
Hmm.
and then it moves so steadily up, and then it doesn't correlate with anything else that I'm seeing in the market. So then
No,
I just
but
go, okay,
yeah, I mean, so I hear your point. Your point is the support that's being created by MicroStrategy buying Bitcoin uh, causing other traders to jump in on what appears to be an upward trend.
that's
Couple
right.
that with the fact that there was this psychological expectation that we want to see Bitcoin go to 100,000. I think a lot of people rallied on that idea, especially once we crossed
That's
that
right.
$74,000 barrier.
Exactly. So we crossed to over to 100,000. We broke all the way up to 108. It fell back down to below, so 91,000, and then
Hmm.
it's basically been consolidating in this zone since. And so because if it was happening and the correlations were matching on different assets, fine. But all my tools now that have to do with the correlation with the dollar,
Thrown out the
it
window.
doesn't work anymore. The dollar is essentially for a currency is essentially skyrocketing.
Mhm.
And so then I go, and that should be bad for liquidity. And it is bad for liquidity on all other assets, including MSTR, but not Bitcoin. That to me doesn't make any sense. So I'm expecting, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a massive correction in Bitcoin because, it's not really being supported by global liquidity flows. This is what makes me nervous.
Okay, so that kind of explains the divergence in global liquidity against the price. So if that helped us move to 100,000, that was a useful tool for last year.
An institution could be either buying, not buying, or selling, right? So if they're
Right.
selling, then chances are they weren't buying this whole time. And the idea is that, or in my mind, once we've exhausted the selling, well, that's bullish then. If they're selling this aggressively and we're still near all-time highs, that to me is not an indication that the bottom is about to fall out, because the bottom falls out. Uh, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, when we get gamma and the other negative gamma, where prices falling and there's these forced selling that occurs that causes these institutions to have to unload the positions. If they're scaling out of their positions and it's not causing the market to crash, isn't that bullish?
I mean,
So it actually ended up being absolutely bullish. So over here, if we take a look at the charts at the time, this was that video was from, I believe, 6 months ago.
yeah,
And
so
if we
six
take a
months
look,
ago.
yeah, and so if we take a look at the markets, then we saw that we did get this we did get the selling. This is the S&P. We were talking during this period where we were selling off, and once that selling was done, that's it.
Pushed
It
us right
was
back up. Right.
pushed us right back up because, as you pointed out, the liquidity flows were there, and so we just wrote that up. It's the core. All trades are a liquidity trade. We're like, I. It's like not the all trades, but like that's the one big trade, and it was absolutely true. And we just literally stair stepped up. And where did it stop? When the liquidity started pulling back. That's exactly where it stopped over here.
That's
And
a fair point.
so there's a nervousness. We've talked about it a couple of times where this is something Ken Carson keeps bringing up, and I keep bringing it up in Carson Corner, where if the scenario of the Santa Claus rally where we get this blow off top at the end of December was something I was hoping for, but it didn't happen. So, but those supportive flows, there's buying that happens at the end of December if the stock market is up that year, which happened, and those flows were enough to offset the drop in global dollar liquidity. So we have this sort of like stagnation that we had in this topping behavior here, basically since November. But once those flows disappear, and they should start disappearing around the middle of January, well, then it's look out below, because there's no bullish flows until April or so. And so this is what makes me nervous. This coupled with um, the dollar going up and gold flat, that tells me we're going to be headed into a window of weakness without enough buying pressure.
So I'm right there with you. I think that puts me in a position where I would be looking to uh, start to see a new break of lower lows. We had that break sort of yesterday. It wicked below the previous candle. And here I thought I was sharing my screen. My bad. I'll bring
This is the
mine back
Nasdaq.
up.
Oh,
This will
very
be
nice.
the SPY or S&P 500. So just zooming in here, you can kind of see like we had that pullback. We were hoping for a Santa Claus rally. Instead, we actually had a pretty big pullback on a single day, and that pushed us to a new low of 580. Or I'll just do SPX since we want to speak in 5,800 terms. So we pulled back to that 5,800, and then we wicked slightly below that yesterday. And I thought that was actually going to end up confirming a lower low, but instead we actually rebounded today. However, this is typically the kind of move that I would expect to see uh, a um, a throwback from, or excuse me, a pullback from. We already saw this as being the high. This is our second pullback, basically a lower high posted. And I would expect that there would be a third one now posted from here. If that's the case, then yeah, I'm also on the same boat. I actually expect we'll pull back even further down to the 5,600 level. Anything below that would be about a 15% pullback overall down to 5,140 or 5,100 in general. This being the major support level for the S&P 500. But the same kind of pattern seems to show up even on Bitcoin, where we're seeing confirmations of a lower high, and even today is a potential where we could close today as a lower high. And unless this pushes higher, this could also be a pullback for Bitcoin. And if it pulls back for Bitcoin, I think the overall retracement pushes us back into the $70,000 range.
Okay, so I want to ask you about your Bitcoin prediction here exactly on the heels of that because that's what I'm worried about too. So let me just pull up something here.
Sure.
I always like sometimes getting your interpretation of my indicators because you're not like married to them, so it's fun for me. 1 second here. Like you were just saying here, we have this bounce here that happened for Bitcoin, and this teal line is my monthly volume weighted moving average,
Mhm.
and uh, it was a top here, it was a top here, here, and now we're back. And here is where I'm wondering: should I enter a short here? Like, did we get the retrace that we're gonna be getting, and now we're gonna be headed back down lower? Um, from I actually didn't take a look at your liquidity indicator beforehand, but it is still downtrending, right? There's no, it hasn't bounced at all.
Correct. Yeah. If you can pull my screen back up, you can see how I've coupled this with Bitcoin. And you can see we've
Right.
been pulling back since the 30th of September, and it's been continued retracement here. So, this whole move from Bitcoin's most recent bottom, the $16,000 bottom, we've seen global liquidity rise, but we're starting to see some confirmation of lower lows consistently here on global liquidity. So I would expect this trend to continue, even while we're seeing a little bit of a pullback and some anticipation that we may even see a resurgence back up to 106, retest this high again before Bitcoin pulls back. But I'm still expecting some kind of healthy correction in both markets. And partly what I think is driving some of this is that it's just buyer exhaustion, unless there's more pressure to the upside. But even in the S&P 500, one of the things that's really concerning me is overall overvaluations. The whole S&P 500 now has reached this point where we hit a peak of roughly 38 price to earnings ratio. And the last time that we saw that number was in October of 21, before we saw the whole market pull back again. And of course, prior to that was, the dot-com bust in 99 and 2000 when it was above 40. So these levels are obviously fairly overextended for the S&P 500. We know that typically in the past, we've seen Bitcoin and the S&P 500's share correlation in general, especially to the downside. So I would expect if there's a pullback in stocks, that we would see a pullback in crypto as well.